Jessica Reed, seeking a sanctuary from the relentless cacophony of urban existence, transplanted her life into the tranquil suburban embrace of Redwood Glen. She yearned for the profound quietude, a gentle balm for her spirit, especially alongside her steadfast husband, Ben Tom Grayson, a dedicated local police officer whose reassuring presence was a constant anchor. Yet, this idyllic vision was subtly marred by the formidable figure next door, a man whose territorial pride bristled at the arrival of newcomers. He considered himself the vigilant steward of the neighborhood's safety, an ethos that, in his estimation, equated to preserving its exclusive, undisturbed nature. Consequently, the polite, albeit strained, exchanges between Tom and Jessica were infused with a palpable chill, an unspoken tension that tightened the air whenever their paths regrettably converged. Tom's pronounced disapproval was an undeniable force, an icy current beneath the surface, and Jessica, a woman of quiet resolve, found herself increasingly challenged by his perpetual scowls and the pointed, veiled hints he meticulously dropped about maintaining the immaculate order of their shared community. One particularly golden afternoon, as the sun dipped lazily toward the horizon, casting long, contemplative shadows across her impeccably manicured lawn, Jessica found herself ensconced in a wicker armchair on her back porch. Beside her sat her mother, Clara, a woman whose eyes held the wisdom of many years, as they discussed the peculiar rhythms of life in Redwood Glen. The air, thick with the scent of blooming jasmine and freshly watered earth, carried Clara's gentle, yet firm, admonition about growing too comfortable, too unwary, with Tom's brooding presence looming so near. Jessica, however, met her mother's concerns with a dismissive wave of her hand, a flicker of rebellious determination igniting deep within her. It was a spark of audacious curiosity, a stubborn belief that perhaps, just perhaps, she could dismantle the formidable walls around him, disarm his inherent suspicion, and even, through some unknown alchemy, compel him to perceive her not as an intruder, but as an integral thread in the vibrant tapestry of their shared world. What unexpected path would this burgeoning resolve lead her down, and what dormant forces might her audacious pursuit awaken in the quiet corners of Redwood Glen? It was not born of any burgeoning desire, but rather a profound, almost defiant assertion of power, the intrinsic power to dictate the reactions, to disrupt the rigid worldview, of a man who, she keenly perceived, believed he held the unilateral right to despise her based solely on the hue of her skin. This unyielding conviction became her silent battle cry. Jessica, with an almost imperceptible shift in her demeanor, commenced a series of careful probes, testing the emotional waters between their two properties. She would greet Tom with an unwavering warmth whenever their paths crossed, her voice a gentle, insistent counterpoint to the unspoken animosity. From across the meticulously kept expanse of their emerald lawns, bathed in the soft morning light, she would deliberately catch his eye, holding his gaze for a beat too long, her smile a subtle, yet potent, challenge. Initially, his defenses seemed impenetrable, his dismissals curt and swift, as if her presence were merely an annoying fly to be swatted away. Yet, with a growing certainty, she began to notice a telling hesitation, a fleeting moment where his stern gaze would linger for a fraction of a second longer than intended, a micro-expression of bewilderment or perhaps, unwilling curiosity. The unspoken tension between them, once a faint hum, now thickened perceptibly, hanging in the sun-drenched air like an impending storm cloud, heavy with unreleased atmospheric pressure. Tom, in his own guarded internal world, could feel the previously unshakable bedrock of his convictions subtly shifting, a disquieting sensation he stubbornly rationalized as mere irritation, a nuisance to be endured. Jessica, however, possessed a keen intuition. She sensed, with an almost primal certainty, that she was indeed breaching his carefully constructed emotional bulwarks, sowing the first seeds of genuine disquiet within him. Jessica's initial, more decorous attempts to subtly charm Tom gradually transmuted into something far more audacious, a deliberate dance on the precipice of decorum. She began to ingeniously contrive minor pretexts to position herself outdoors, often in the late afternoon glow when the sun cast long, amber shadows across the quiet street, precisely as his patrol cruiser would purr to a stop in his driveway, signaling the end of his shift. Her eyes, brimming with an unyielding confidence, would invariably lock with his across the neatly trimmed verges, as she offered a casual, almost languid wave, or a smile that was undeniably knowing, a silent acknowledgement of their burgeoning, unspoken dynamic. On those rare occasions when their proximity necessitated actual conversation, perhaps about a stray branch or a shared property line, she would lean in ever so slightly, the scent of her subtle perfume, a delicate blend of freesia and white musk, momentarily invading his personal space. Her voice would drop to a conspiratorial whisper, a playful, husky tone that deliberately flirted with the boundaries of propriety, as she lightly, yet pointedly, teased him about his self-appointed role as the undisputed sheriff of Redwood Glen. Each such interaction was a deliberate stroke, a calculated move in her intricate game of emotional chess, pushing against his rigid boundaries with an unsettling precision. What complex web of emotions was she unwittingly weaving, and how would this escalating intimacy irrevocably alter the carefully maintained equilibrium of their quiet, suburban world? Monica Grayson, Tom's unsuspecting wife, a woman whose days revolved around the quiet routines of their suburban life, began to discern subtle shifts in her husband's demeanor. She noted, with a growing sense of unease, how easily his attention could be fractured, how his mind seemed to wander, even in the midst of their shared domestic moments. Yet, whenever she gently inquired, he would invariably dismiss her observations, attributing his newfound distraction to the mounting pressures and relentless stress of his demanding work as a police officer. One particular evening, as twilight deepened into an inky shroud, Tom, seeking refuge from the persistent hum of his own restless thoughts, retreated to the familiar sanctuary of his garage. The air was thick with the scent of motor oil and sawdust, and the metallic clatter of his tools provided a welcome, rhythmic distraction as he meticulously tinkered, attempting to re-establish a sense of control and to forcefully push her from his mind. It was precisely at that moment, as the garage door stood ajar, casting a rectangle of warm, inviting light onto the cool concrete of the driveway, that Jessica materialized at its very edge, a spectral figure emerging from the deepening shadows. Her eyes, catching the faint glow from within, glinted with an almost predatory mischief, a clear indication of her calculated intrusion. "Need any help with that, officer?" she purred, her voice a low, tantalizing murmur that seemed to coil around him. Her sudden, unexpected proximity was a potent, almost intoxicating force, a dizzying blend of forbidden allure and palpable danger. In the dim, ambient light of the garage, she could clearly perceive the raw, internal conflict raging behind his usually impassive eyes, a visceral struggle between the deep-seated disdain he had so carefully cultivated for her, and an undeniable, surging undercurrent of desire. Against every fiber of his moral compass, against the very bedrock of his carefully constructed judgment, Tom found himself inexorably drawn into her orbit, a moth helplessly circling a dangerously seductive flame. He was giving in, succumbing to the exhilarating, perilous thrill of the forbidden. Their clandestine meetings, once tentative and fraught with apprehension, rapidly morphed into a regular, almost ritualistic occurrence. These illicit rendezvous unfolded in the shadowed confines of his garage, a secret world just steps away from the oblivious domesticity within their house, where Monica remained blissfully unaware, lost in her own innocent pursuits. Each furtive encounter intensified, a dangerous escalation of unspoken desires and unspoken betrayals. Tom, in those stolen moments, felt an unfamiliar surge of vitality, a potent aliveness he hadn't experienced in years, a stark contrast to the quiet stagnation of his long-standing marriage. Yet, this newfound exhilaration was inextricably intertwined with a gnawing guilt, a chilling realization that every touch, every whispered word, every shared glance, was a profound betrayal of his deeply ingrained values and, most heartbreakingly, of his trusting wife. Jessica, meanwhile, savored her burgeoning victory, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She reveled in the undeniable knowledge that she had successfully breached the formidable shield he had meticulously constructed around himself, shattering his carefully maintained composure. For her, however, the entire elaborate charade remained nothing more than a thrilling, high-stakes game, a mere exercise in power and manipulation. What dark consequences awaited them both as this dangerous game continued to unfold, and what unseen forces were being set into motion by their illicit liaison, threatening to unravel the very fabric of Redwood Glen? For Jessica, the intoxicating thrill, that heady rush of rebellious conquest, began to dissipate after a few months, like a fleeting scent caught on the wind. What had initially been a captivating challenge, a game of calculated risk, now felt increasingly oppressive. Tom, once a formidable, unyielding figure, had transformed. He became alarmingly possessive, his subtle demands morphing into incessant phone calls at unconventional hours, inventing increasingly flimsy excuses to engineer their next illicit encounter. The subtle threads of their secret connection began to feel like a suffocating net, slowly tightening around her. What had once been a thrilling act of rebellion, a defiant assertion of her own power, now weighed heavily upon her, a burdensome obligation. Her responses became terse, her previously playful smiles vanishing. She began actively avoiding his lingering glances, abruptly cutting short any attempts at conversation, and, with a final, decisive break, she ceased appearing at their clandestine meetings altogether. Tom, however, was ill-equipped to process such a stark rejection. His meticulously ordered world, already destabilized by their affair, now threatened to crumble entirely. From the shadowed confines of his living room, a space once filled with the muted comfort of domesticity, he would catch fleeting glimpses of Jessica from across the manicured lawns. She would be laughing, a sound that now grated on his nerves, in the easy, unburdened company of Ben, her husband. In those moments, his nascent jealousy, a bitter, corrosive emotion, curdled into a festering anger. The nights became a tormented landscape of sleeplessness, his mind a relentless churn of increasingly dark and vindictive thoughts. A dangerous resolve began to solidify within him. He was determined to make her experience the searing sting of betrayal, to inflict a wound mirroring the one he felt. His mind raced, constructing intricate scenarios, devising twisted ways to reassert his control over her, to reclaim the power he perceived she had so carelessly snatched away. His frustration, initially a dull ache, mounted steadily, morphing into a dangerous, all-consuming obsession. This dark fixation, he chillingly concluded, would only find its quietus, its final, terrifying peace, by silencing her once and for all. Jessica, in her relative naivety, remained utterly oblivious to the terrifying depths of his fixation, believing, in her own dismissive way, that Tom would eventually, reluctantly, simply let their brief, volatile affair go. But in the distorted, increasingly paranoid landscape of his mind, she had ceased to be a mere dalliance, she had become a dangerous distraction, a volatile, inconvenient loose end that, in his chilling logic, urgently needed tying up. The very air around Redwood Glen seemed to thicken, charged with an unspoken menace, a silent harbinger of the chilling events poised to unfold. Driven by a corrosive blend of wounded pride and vengeful fury, Tom descended into a chilling realm of clandestine plotting, meticulously crafting each detail of a sinister design. His objective was terrifyingly clear: to orchestrate a scenario that would forever ensure Jessica could never, under any circumstance, ignore him again. With each passing sun, his obsession metastasized, growing into an insidious malignancy that consumed his every waking thought. The once distinct boundary between his placid suburban life and the twisted, clandestine affair blurred into an indistinguishable, perilous mess. This internal turmoil inevitably began to manifest in subtle, yet palpable, shifts in his domestic demeanor. Monica, his long-suffering wife, a woman whose inherent empathy often shielded her from darker truths, registered his heightened agitation, the restless pacing that wore faint paths across their plush living room carpet, and the perpetually distracted, faraway look in his usually steady eyes. When, with gentle concern, she dared to inquire if anything was amiss, Tom would lash out, his words sharp and unexpected, covering his tracks with the convenient, albeit increasingly threadbare, excuse of overwhelming job stress. Yet, beneath this brittle facade, he was slowly, inexorably, unraveling, his composure eroding under the relentless, acidic burn of Jessica's rejection. Jessica, meanwhile, began to feel the heavy, oppressive weight of her earlier, fleeting triumph. A disquieting awareness pricked at her once confident demeanor as she started to notice Tom's dark sedan, a predatory shadow, parked with unsettling frequency at the far end of her street. His gaze, even from that distance, seemed to bore into her home, a silent, daring challenge, an unspoken command for her to step outside. At first, she attempted to rationalize these disturbing observations, dismissing them as mere paranoia, a natural consequence of their affair, optimistically assuming he would eventually, inevitably, lose interest and recede into the background. However, Ben, her astute and devoted husband, possessed a keen intuition that refused to be quelled. He had, with a quiet resignation, observed Jessica's earlier, more overt flirtations with their enigmatic neighbor. Despite these unsettling glimpses into a potential indiscretion, his unwavering trust in her remained steadfast, a testament to the deep, resilient bond they shared. They had navigated numerous tempestuous patches in their marriage, weathering storms that might have shattered lesser unions, and through it all, they had always emerged closer, their connection seemingly unyielding. Yet, an ineffable disquiet now settled over Ben, a premonition that something profoundly amiss was brewing beneath the placid surface of their suburban existence. What dark secrets lurked in the meticulously manicured gardens of Redwood Glen, and what terrible cascade of events was already in motion, unbeknownst to those who walked its quiet streets. When Ben, his brow furrowed with genuine concern, finally confronted Jessica about Tom's increasingly unsettling habit of staring, she instinctively downplayed the gravity of the situation. Her voice, perhaps a little too light, assured him that the police officer next door was utterly harmless, a mere eccentric figure perhaps, whose lingering glances meant nothing. Yet, beneath this carefully constructed facade of nonchalance, a cold, creeping tendril of unease began to twine around her heart. It was a premonition, a silent scream of impending danger that she desperately tried to suppress. The peaceful veneer of Redwood Glen, once a comforting embrace, now felt thin, almost translucent, revealing the shadows beneath. One particularly oppressive evening, as the lingering twilight bled into a velvet darkness, Jessica returned to her seemingly safe haven. The familiar porch light cast an inviting glow, yet what she discovered there shattered the illusion of security. Neatly placed on her pristine white porch swing, amidst the meticulously arranged potted ferns, lay a cryptic, chilling message. Her car keys, which she distinctly remembered leaving in the ignition, had been deliberately removed and then subtly tampered with, the delicate metal of the key ring slightly bent. Beside them, a folded piece of paper bore a stark, ominous declaration penned in a bold, unwavering hand, "It's not over." A cold dread seized Jessica, her pulse hammering in erratic rhythm against her ribs. The implicit threat felt like a final, desperate warning from Tom, a sinister last-ditch effort to reclaim her attention, to reassert his toxic control. She confided in Clara, her mother, a woman whose eyes held a deep, unshakable wisdom. Clara, her face etched with worry, vehemently urged her daughter to report the disturbing incident to the local police, to seek the protection of the very law Tom was sworn to uphold. But Jessica, her jaw set with a stubborn resolve, fiercely resisted. She couldn't risk the inevitable scandal that would erupt, the public humiliation, or, most painfully, the devastating possibility of Ben discovering the full extent of her reckless dalliance. Clara could discern the profound regret shimmering in her daughter's usually defiant eyes, a stark admission of misjudgment. Yet, despite this unspoken remorse, Jessica remained stubbornly determined to handle the burgeoning crisis alone, believing she could navigate the treacherous currents by herself. Little did she know, in his own dark and meticulous world, Tom had already set a deadly, irreversible plan into motion. As Tom's consuming anger and chilling obsession with Jessica intensified, escalating from a smoldering resentment to a raging inferno, he began the chilling, painstaking process of crafting a meticulously detailed plan. Each component had to be flawlessly executed, he understood, with the cold precision of a predator, that even the slightest misstep, the smallest oversight, could expose him entirely. He began to study her daily schedule with an almost obsessive fervor, tracking her movements, her routines, every minute detail, waiting with bated breath for the perfect, isolated opportunity to finally catch her utterly alone. The quiet hum of the suburban night seemed to conceal a growing, insidious threat, waiting for its moment to strike. The nights stretched long and insomniac, consumed by the oppressive atmosphere of his garage. Tom's footsteps, a relentless rhythm across the oil-stained concrete, echoed the tumultuous churning of his mind. He paced, a caged predator, sharpening his seething anger into a razor-sharp focus, his thoughts a cacophony of Jessica's defiant laughter and dismissive tones. Each memory played on a loop, the vivid recollection of her disinterest, the casual way she had cast him aside, igniting a fresh, searing layer of rage deep within him. The very air around him seemed to thicken with his palpable fury. Then came a particularly dreary, rain-soaked night, the kind that cloaked Redwood Glen in a shroud of isolation. From the obscured vantage point of his living room window, Tom watched, his breath misting on the cool glass, as Jessica's slender silhouette moved gracefully across the illuminated expanse of her own living room. The flickering, unreliable glow of the street lamp outside cast ominous, dancing shadows around her, transforming the mundane scene into something sinister, further fueling his twisted sense of justification. In his dangerously warped perception, she had not merely ended an affair, she had irrevocably betrayed him, publicly mocked his very existence, and discarded him as if he were utterly worthless, an insignificant speck. It was in that moment, as he finally observed Ben's vehicle disappearing down the rain-slicked street, indicating his departure for an overnight work shift, that Tom's final, horrifying decision solidified. With a chilling calm, he slipped on a pair of dark, unassuming gloves, the soft leather molding to his hands. He then meticulously double-checked the cold, metallic weight of the weapon concealed beneath his jacket, its presence a grim reassurance. Moving with a silent, almost preternatural purpose, a predator stalking its prey, he glided across the rain-soaked lawns, his figure barely a ripple in the pervasive gloom. Jessica, in her innocent unawareness, believed she had merely played a game, a fleeting rebellion. But in her final, terrifying moments, he would ensure she understood the true, deadly scope of her defiance. For her actions, her audacious spirit, had irrevocably awakened a monstrous entity within him, a dark beast that had been dormant but could now, irrevocably, no longer be caged. The silence of Redwood Glen was about to be shattered in the most brutal way imaginable, leaving a permanent scar on its tranquil facade. Ben, returning home in the pre-dawn hours from his arduous overnight shift, was met not by the familiar, comforting glow of the porch light, but by an unsettling, almost palpable quietude. The front door of their usually vibrant house, a place of warmth and laughter, stood slightly ajar, a silent, gaping maw that immediately struck him with an inexplicable, bone-deep chill. A shiver, unrelated to the crisp morning air, snaked down his spine. The unnerving stillness that permeated the otherwise tranquil suburban street, a stark contrast to the lively sounds he usually expected, set off a cacophony of alarms in his mind. As he pushed the door fully open, the silence within felt heavy, suffocating, confirming his deepest instincts, something was terribly, irrevocably wrong. He called out for Jessica, his voice, usually steady and calm, now cracking with an undeniable urgency, but only the hollow echo of his own fear responded. Each step he took further into the house felt like wading through treacle, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. As he finally rounded the corner into the living room, a space that held countless cherished memories, his entire world shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Jessica's lifeless body lay crumpled on the Persian rug, a stark, tragic tableau against the familiar backdrop of their home. Her warmth, her vivacious light, had been extinguished in an instant, leaving behind an unbearable void. Ben's scream, a raw, primal sound of agony and disbelief, tore from his throat, echoing through the empty, silent house, a testament to his shattered soul. His knees, suddenly devoid of strength, buckled beneath him, and he collapsed to the floor, instinctively clutching her cold hand in a desperate, futile attempt to reanimate her, to somehow bring her back from the abyss. A tumultuous storm of emotions tore through him, an overwhelming sorrow so profound it threatened to consume him whole, intertwined with a searing, visceral rage. Amidst his grief-stricken haze, his eyes, still sharp with the training of a police officer, noticed something glinting faintly on the polished hardwood floor, just inches from Jessica's outstretched hand. It was a wedding ring, a distinctive band of brushed platinum. Recognizing it instantly as Tom's, his neighbor's, a chilling, undeniable certainty pierced through his despair. The realization seared through him, intensifying his grief and twisting it into a cold, calculated rage that promised retribution. The peaceful facade of Redwood Glen had been irrevocably shattered, and a new, terrifying chapter of vengeance was about to begin. With his heart irrevocably fractured, reduced to a mosaic of pain and profound loss, and a searing, relentless vengeance burning with an infernal intensity deep within his soul, Ben made an unwavering, solemn vow. He swore, with every fiber of his being, that he would not find rest, would not know peace, until he had meticulously ensured Tom paid the ultimate, agonizing price for the monstrous act he had committed. His path, now illuminated by a single, terrifying purpose, was irrevocably set, and he would pursue it with an unrelenting tenacity, stopping at nothing until his own brutal version of justice was unequivocally served. Meanwhile, Tom, a man now utterly consumed by his own depravity, had vanished from Redwood Glen, leaving behind a devastating wake of shattered lives and an indelible stain on the idyllic suburban landscape. He embarked on a frantic, desperate flight, a perpetual motion of guilt and fear, moving ceaselessly from state to state, never lingering for more than a few days. His temporary havens were confined to the grimy, anonymous confines of rundown motels, each one a temporary prison from which he constantly peered over his shoulder, his eyes wide with a burgeoning paranoia. His mind, a chaotic maelstrom of fear and self-preservation, raced relentlessly, haunted by vivid, nightmarish replays of Jessica's face, etched forever in the terrifying tableau of the violent confrontation he had so cruelly left in his wake. Sleep offered no solace, his nights were a torment of restless knees, every creak of a floorboard, every distant wail of a siren, snapping him bolt upright in a cold sweat, his heart hammering with panic. He had effectively become a phantom, a spectral figure moving through the underbelly of society, invisible in the bustling anonymity of crowded bus stations, the shadowed depths of forgotten alleyways, and the desolate, fluorescent-lit confines of roadside diners. To merely subsist, to sustain his desperate flight, Tom descended further into a life of petty crimes, his moral compass long since shattered. He resorted to robbing unsuspecting strangers for meager cash, meticulously forging false identification papers, and constantly altering his physical appearance, a chameleon desperately trying to evade its predator. In a moment of sheer desperation, driven by the gnawing need for information, he made a furtive call to Dennis Lawson, his old friend and former fellow officer, hoping to surreptitiously extract details about the unfolding murder investigation. What chilling truths might Dennis inadvertently reveal, and how close was Ben to finally closing in on his quarry? The hunt had truly begun. Dennis, a man of quiet integrity, found himself ensnared in an agonizing moral dilemma, torn acutely between the lingering vestiges of loyalty to his old friend, Tom, and a burgeoning, icy suspicion that gnawed at his conscience. His responses to Tom's increasingly desperate calls were deliberately vague, carefully chosen to convey minimal information, all while his own mind worked feverishly, meticulously piecing together the fragmented, disturbing truth. Each furtive conversation only served to heighten Dennis's profound worry about Tom's rapidly deteriorating mental state, a descent into paranoia and desperation that was terrifying to witness. Yet, despite his own escalating moral misgivings, the deeply ingrained bonds of friendship prevented him from fully abandoning his comrade, even as the chasm between right and wrong widened between them. Meanwhile, Tom's once carefully constructed facade of control, already brittle, was crumbling rapidly, dissolving under the relentless pressure of his guilt and fear. With every desperate act, every furtive glance over his shoulder, he could almost feel Ben closing in, a silent, implacable specter of the revenge he had so tragically set in motion. Ben and Lucas, united by a bond forged in years of shared brotherhood and now hardened by a singular, consuming mission, had become relentless in their pursuit. Their focus was unyielding, their determination absolute, as they tirelessly tracked Tom's every move across the vast, indifferent landscape of the country. Their once strong camaraderie, traditionally rooted in shared experiences and mutual support, had been irrevocably transformed into a singular, unwavering engine of vengeance. With Lucas steadfastly by his side, Ben dedicated countless, arduous hours to sifting through fragmented leads, chasing down nebulous rumors, and scrutinizing the smallest, most ephemeral hints of Tom's whereabouts. Each nondescript town they passed through, each forgotten diner or gas station, seemed to hold a faint, almost ghostly trace of their elusive target. And with each painstaking step closer, Ben felt the profound, aching weight of Jessica's memory pressing upon him, a silent, powerful force urging him onward, fueling his unwavering resolve. Their grim odyssey eventually led them to a remote, sun-baked desert town nestled deep in the unforgiving landscape of Nevada, a desolate outpost that marked Tom's last confirmed location. The air hung heavy with dust and unspoken anticipation, the desolate surroundings a stark reflection of the emptiness within Ben's heart, yet also a promise of imminent confrontation. What arid, unforgiving truths awaited them in this forgotten corner of the world, and would this desolate landscape finally bear witness to the confrontation that would bring Ben a semblance of peace, or merely deepen his pain? Lucas, grounded by an intrinsic pragmatism and a deep understanding of the law, attempted, with a heavy heart, to temper Ben's spiraling, vengeful fury. He cautioned his friend, his voice laced with solemnity, about the perilous consequences of attempting to wrest justice from the hands of the legal system and take it into his own, potentially bloodied, ones. He painted a stark picture of the inevitable repercussions, the devastating aftermath that such an act would surely unleash. Yet, Ben's resolve, hardened by grief and an unyielding thirst for retribution, remained utterly unbreakable, a fortress against Lucas's reasoned appeals. There was no reaching him, no turning back. Then, bathed in the harsh, unforgiving glare of the desert sun, they finally spotted Tom. He was emerging from a dilapidated gas station, his gaunt figure a shadow against the peeling paint of the building. His eyes, sunken and haunted, darted nervously in every direction, a man living on the ragged edge of paranoia, as if he could physically feel the oppressive weight of their gaze, the silent, vengeful presence behind him. Ben's pulse, a frantic drumbeat against his temples, quickened almost imperceptibly, his entire being narrowing to a single, laser-sharp point of focus. The chase, the culmination of weeks of relentless pursuit, was irrevocably on. He felt Jessica's ethereal presence in every throb of his heart, in every fiber of his being, a silent, powerful force urging him forward. In the stark, unforgiving landscape of his mind, the plan had crystallized into an unyielding certainty. There would be no negotiation, no mercy, no conceivable escape for Tom. As they sped headlong down the dark, ribbon-like desert road, the vast, inky expanse of the night sky above them, Ben knew, with a chilling clarity, that only one of them would emerge alive from the crucible of the impending confrontation. The pursuit through the desolate, ancient desert unfolded like a waking nightmare, each mile a deepening plunge into the abyss. Tom's battered car, a mere speck against the immense, indifferent landscape, tore down the deserted highway, its engine screaming in protest. His fear, a living, breathing entity, swelled within him as he glimpsed Ben's relentless vehicle, a vengeful phantom, gaining inexorably on him in the rearview mirror. Every mile was a brutal test of endurance, both physical and psychological, and Tom's desperation, raw and palpable, clung to him like a shroud. The terrifying realization that his heinous sins were finally, inescapably catching up with him gnawed relentlessly at the last vestiges of his sanity. Each desperate twist and turn of the winding desert road was not merely a path, but a chilling countdown to an inevitable, violent confrontation that would forever seal their fates. What primal forces were unleashed beneath the vast, indifferent desert sky, and what brutal end awaited them both in the heart of the desolate wilderness? Adrenaline, a potent, volatile cocktail of fear and desperation, surged through Tom's veins, electrifying every nerve ending as he pushed the stolen car to its absolute, screaming limits. The engine roared in protest, a banshee wail against the vast, indifferent desert night. Yet, despite his frenetic speed, he could feel Ben's presence, an inescapable, relentless weight, a shadow of impending judgment bearing down on him from behind, a constant reminder of the retribution he could no longer outrun. In contrast, Ben's focus was an unwavering, laser-sharp point, his hands gripping the steering wheel of his own vehicle with a preternatural steadiness, a calm he hadn't known, hadn't felt, in the agonizing months since Jessica's death. For him, this relentless chase was far more than a mere physical pursuit. It was a profound, visceral emotional journey, a purging, a violent catharsis of his unbearable grief, his festering anger, and the searing agony of betrayal that had consumed him. The night stretched endlessly before them, a canvas of impenetrable darkness punctuated only by the distant, echoing roar of their engines and the whispering hiss of tires on the loose gravel of the desolate road. Finally, in a desperate, last-ditch gamble, Tom swerved abruptly, tires screaming in protest, onto a barely visible, isolated stretch of dirt track. This winding path, he knew with a chilling certainty, led inexorably to a dead-end canyon, its sheer, unforgiving rock faces rising like ancient sentinels against the moonless sky. The chase, the frantic, high-speed flight, was undeniably over. But Ben's insatiable thirst for vengeance, a burning inferno in his soul, was far from quenched. He stepped deliberately out of his car, the harsh, unforgiving desert wind whipping around him, tearing at his clothes, as he locked eyes with Tom across the desolate, dust-choked expanse. The air crackled with a palpable tension, thick with the weight of unspoken accusations and unfulfilled promises. The moment of reckoning, a brutal, inevitable culmination of their intertwined destinies, had finally arrived. The confrontation that ensued was raw, visceral, and utterly unfiltered, a cataclysmic eruption of all the pent-up rage, the primal fear, and the profound, soul-shattering grief that had inexorably led them to this desolate, forgotten place. The desert, silent witness to countless eons, now braced itself for the violent outpouring of human emotion, for a final, terrifying act in a tragedy that had started in the quiet, manicured streets of Redwood Glen. What would be the ultimate cost of this confrontation, and what, if anything, would remain standing once the dust settled? Tom, a man now stripped bare of all pretense, stood utterly cornered, his back pressing hard against the cold, unyielding metal of his abandoned car, the last bastion of his fleeting freedom. Ben approached him with a grim, chilling determination, his silhouette a dark, avenging angel against the vast, indifferent desert night. In a final, desperate act of defiance, a pathetic flicker of his former arrogance, Tom's trembling hand fumbled at his belt, drawing forth a black pistol. The cold steel felt both alien and familiar in his grasp as he shakily aimed it at Ben. His voice, strained and hoarse, cracked with a mixture of fear and lingering rage as he sneered, attempting, even in this dire moment, to justify his monstrous actions. "She thought she could mess with me," he spat, the words a venomous spray. "She asked for this." Ben's expression, however, remained utterly unwavering, a mask of unyielding resolve. He was far beyond the reach of intimidation, his soul steeled by an unshakable purpose. He continued his slow, deliberate advance, each measured step bringing him closer to the man who had shattered his world, his gaze fixed, unwavering, on Tom's terrified eyes. "Jessica didn't deserve what you did to her," Ben replied, his voice a low, steady rumble, devoid of any tremor. "This is for her." The words hung heavy in the desolate air, a solemn promise of retribution. Tom's desperate shot, fired in a moment of pure, blinding fear, went wild, embedding itself harmlessly in the dust behind Ben. His aim, clouded by panic and the sheer terror of impending judgment, failed him completely. In the instant of that misfire, Ben lunged forward with a primal surge of energy, knocking the pistol from Tom's trembling hand with a swift, brutal strike. The weapon clattered to the rocky ground, echoing ominously in the vast silence. The two men then grappled fiercely, locked in a brutal dance of death under the cold, indifferent gaze of the starlit sky. Their fight was a raw, visceral testament to the profound devastation that hatred, betrayal, and an insatiable thirst for vengeance had wrought upon them both. With one final, almost superhuman surge of strength, Ben forced Tom to the unforgiving desert earth, pinning him beneath his full weight. His eyes blazed with a cold, righteous fury, a fire that had been stoked by grief and now threatened to consume them both. The chilling climax of their tragic saga hung suspended in the desert air, poised on the knife edge of retribution. What ultimate fate awaited Tom, and would Ben find true peace in the desolate aftermath of his vengeance? He whispered, the words barely audible against the desert wind, almost to himself, as if seeking confirmation from the desolate expanse, "It ends here." In that harrowing moment, pressed against the unforgiving earth with Tom struggling beneath him, Ben felt the crushing weight of every choice, every immeasurable loss, every agonizing, painful moment he had endured since Jessica's brutal death. A lifetime of sorrow and rage coalesced into this single, potent instant. And as he looked down into Tom's fear-stricken eyes, devoid of any genuine remorse, he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that there was no forgiveness to be found in this arid, desolate landscape, only the stark, unyielding promise of retribution. The brutal brawl, a raw, primal struggle for dominance and vengeance, left both men bloodied and utterly exhausted, their bodies aching, their breath ragged. Yet, Ben's fury, an inferno stoked by an unquenchable grief, remained unyielding, a relentless force driving him forward. Tom, a pathetic shadow of his former self, attempted a desperate, scrambling retreat, trying to crawl away from the inevitable, his fingers scrabbling at the loose gravel. But Ben, swift and merciless, caught him by the collar, his grip iron-strong, and roughly dragged him back to his feet. In that agonizing instant, Tom was no longer the imposing figure of authority, the self-proclaimed sheriff of Redwood Glen he once was. He was merely a terrified, desperate man, utterly broken by the colossal weight of his own hubris and the monstrous consequences of his actions. His very essence seemed to shrivel under Ben's burning gaze. Driven by a pure, consuming hatred, Ben leaned in close, his voice a low, guttural growl, a whispered promise of ultimate, irreversible consequence. "This is for Jess. Jessica," he rasped, each syllable laden with the weight of her memory. "You took her life, you'll pay with yours." As Tom struggled anew, a pathetic, futile flailing against his captor, Ben's hand, with a chilling deliberation, reached into his pocket. He withdrew a small, sleek device, a remote detonator he had meticulously prepared, a harbinger of the final act. It was linked, he knew, to a makeshift, yet lethally effective, bomb he had strategically hidden beneath Tom's car, now just a few yards away, waiting to be consumed by fire. Ben's thumb hovered, trembling slightly, over the activation button, a silent, terrible judgment held in his trembling hand. He gave Tom one last, long, searing look, a silent condemnation that spoke volumes, before making his final, irreversible decision. The desert wind howled, a mournful dirge, anticipating the terrifying explosion about to rip through the night, bringing this harrowing saga to its violent, definitive close. Tom's face, a canvas of escalating dread, twisted from an initial, profound shock into an expression of abject, unadulterated terror as the full, horrifying scope of Ben's meticulously planned intentions finally dawned upon him. The implications of the detonator, the bomb beneath his car, the finality of it all, crashed down upon his shattered consciousness. Before a single syllable of desperate begging, of pleas for reason or mercy, could escape his parched throat, Ben's thumb descended with an unyielding, deliberate pressure, activating the remote detonator. The vast, encompassing silence of the desert night was instantly, violently shattered by a thunderous, concussive blast. Tom's car, a symbol of his desperate flight, erupted into a blinding inferno, the explosion sending a massive, fiery plume of orange and black smoke billowing majestically into the dark, indifferent sky. The heat radiating from the inferno was intense, almost suffocating, waves of it washing over Ben and Lucas as they stood a safe, yet unnervingly close, distance away, their faces illuminated by the savage, dancing light. For a fleeting, surreal moment, Ben watched, mesmerized by the consuming inferno that now held what remained of Tom Grayson. It was a powerful, visceral release, a momentary triumph over the forces that had shattered his life. But as the hungry flames crackled and devoured, licking at the remnants of metal and rubber, he felt only a profound, hollow satisfaction, an emptiness where he had expected catharsis. Ben's broad shoulders sagged, the immense, crushing weight of his action, of the irrevocable step he had just taken, settling heavily upon him. He turned slowly to Lucas, his trusted confidant and steadfast companion. "It's done," he muttered, the words heavy with an unspoken burden, devoid of any genuine relief. Lucas, who had supported him every step of the way through this agonizing odyssey of vengeance, simply nodded, his gaze compassionate and understanding. He recognized the complex, turbulent mixture of stark relief and profound remorse etched deeply into his brother's weary face. He knew, with an absolute certainty, that Ben had sought, and achieved, his own brutal brand of justice. Yet, he also sensed, with an empathetic clarity, the immeasurable, devastating toll this dark journey had exacted, the irreparable scars it had left upon Ben's very soul. The desert fire, now beginning to dim, cast long, wavering shadows, leaving behind not peace, but a lingering question of what kind of future could possibly be built on such scorched earth. The two men, cloaked in a heavy, pervasive silence that felt as vast and ancient as the desert itself, walked away from the inferno. They left the consuming flames to burn themselves down to smoldering embers, their light steadily diminishing in the cool, profound quiet of the night. Neither spoke a single word, yet both understood, with a chilling, shared certainty, that there was no conceivable path back to the lives they had known, no undoing the finality of their actions. News of Tom's violent, abrupt end, carried on the invisible currents of gossip and morbid curiosity, spread like wildfire through the meticulously manicured streets of Redwood Glen. The tight-knit, ostensibly idyllic community, once defined by its quiet routines and polite exchanges, was left reeling, its carefully constructed facade shattered by the sheer horror of the unfolding tragedy. Tom's widow, Monica, a woman whose life had been anchored by the illusion of domestic tranquility, was utterly devastated, her world fracturing into irreparable pieces. She grappled, with a profound and disorienting agony, to process the unfathomable horror of her husband's monstrous double life, the shocking revelation of his clandestine affair with Jessica, the unspeakable brutality of his crime, and now, the visceral shock of his own violent, fiery death. Friends and neighbors, their faces etched with a complex blend of genuine sorrow and barely concealed curiosity, gathered around her, offering whispered condolences. Yet, beneath the veneer of sympathy, murmurs circulated like a silent contagion, as fragmented rumors and insidious half-truths about the dark undercurrents of their community slowly, relentlessly, came to light, exposing the rot beneath the pristine surface. Jessica's family, too, faced the harsh, brutal reality of her irrevocable loss. Clara Reed, her mother, a woman whose spirit had always been resilient, found herself adrift in a maelstrom of conflicting emotions, a profound, soul-deep grief inextricably mingled with a simmering, righteous anger. Her daughter's tragic, violent end was a wound that, she knew with a desolate certainty, would never, truly, fully heal. As she stoically began the heartbreaking task of planning Jessica's memorial service, a desperate attempt to honor her daughter's memory amidst the chaos, she extended an invitation to Pastor James Carter, a man known for his compassionate wisdom, to lead a vigil at the solemn gathering. Pastor James, his voice resonating with a quiet yet powerful conviction, spoke passionately and eloquently. His somber message, delivered with a gravitas that commanded attention, centered on the profound, devastating cost of hatred and the lasting, corrosive damage that unchecked prejudice could inflict upon individuals and entire communities. The words hung in the air, a stark reminder that even in the most serene of settings, the human heart could harbor darkness, and the ripple effects of such darkness could extend far beyond the initial act, leaving an indelible mark on all it touched. What fragile hope could possibly emerge from such a profound tragedy, and could Redwood Glen ever truly heal from the wounds that had been so brutally exposed? The assembled townspeople, their faces a tableau of shock and somber reflection, sat in an uneasy, almost suffocating silence, each person wrestling with their own thoughts. They reflected, with a disquieting solemnity, upon the deep, previously unseen fractures that had now been irrevocably exposed within the seemingly harmonious veneer of their community. Some, their minds grappling with the uncomfortable truth, began to comprehend that Tom's heinous actions had been propelled by a deep-seated, corrosive hatred, a virulent prejudice that had been allowed to fester and grow unchecked within the quiet confines of his soul. Others, however, perhaps clinging to a simpler narrative, merely mourned the loss of a neighbor, a familiar face, gone too soon, choosing to gloss over the darker implications. But regardless of their individual interpretations, no one present could deny the profound, destructive ripple effect left by Tom's catastrophic choices, nor the dark, indelible legacy that would undoubtedly haunt the town of Redwood Glen for years, perhaps even generations, to come. In the immediate, tumultuous wake of Tom's violent death, Redwood Glen, once a symbol of suburban tranquility, became a place deeply and irrevocably divided. Whispers, laden with suspicion and thinly veiled blame, permeated every corner of the community, infiltrating conversations in the fluorescent aisles of grocery stores, echoing softly within the hallowed walls of the church, and seeping into the sanctity of private homes. Some residents, their moral compasses perhaps skewed by the raw emotion of the tragedy, felt a grim satisfaction, believing that a definitive, albeit brutal, form of justice had been meted out. Others, however, found themselves profoundly unsettled, questioning the very ethics of vigilante justice and grappling with the deeply disquieting implications of Ben's undeniable, if still officially unconfirmed, role in Tom's fiery demise. Meanwhile, Detective Carla Moore, a woman of sharp intellect and unwavering resolve, had been meticulously assigned the unenviable task of investigating both Jessica's brutal murder and Tom's subsequent, mysterious death. With a sharpened, almost surgical focus, she delved into each tantalizing clue, each discarded piece of evidence. Moore's extensive interviews with those closest to the interwoven cases, from grieving family members to wary neighbors and reluctant colleagues, began to unravel a tangled, treacherous web of long-held secrets and unspoken resentments that had simmered menacingly below the placid surface of Redwood Glen for far too long, just waiting for the perfect, devastating moment to erupt. What further truths would Detective Moore unearth, and how would these revelations finally reshape the shattered landscape of a community forever altered by its hidden darkness? The true reckoning, for all involved, was only just beginning. Ruby Michaels, the veritable oracle of Redwood Glen, whose keen eyes and even keener tongue missed nothing, eagerly shared every snippet and observation she had gleaned, adding her own flamboyant, often embellished, spin to the unfolding, tragic events. Her narratives, a potent blend of truth and conjecture, were a vivid testament to the hidden lives and simmering tensions within their ostensibly serene community. Dennis Lawson, Tom's longtime friend and a man now burdened by a heavy conscience, spoke with a palpable regret. He candidly admitted to his growing, unsettling suspicion of Tom's dangerous obsession with Jessica, expressing profound remorse for not having acted sooner, for not having intervened when the warning signs were already glaring. Despite the deep-seated loyalty he had once felt, he now understood with a painful clarity that he had, in essence, turned a willful blind eye to Tom's increasingly disturbing, darker side. The fragmented pieces of the puzzle began to click into place for Detective Moore, who, with her sharp investigative instincts, strongly sensed Ben's undeniable involvement in Tom's demise. Yet, the elusive nature of concrete, irrefutable proof eluded her, a frustrating barrier in her methodical pursuit of the truth. Her determination, however, only intensified, fueled by a growing conviction that the story she was uncovering was far deeper, more tangled, and infinitely more tragic than she had initially anticipated. The quiet facade of Redwood Glen had cracked wide open, revealing a cesspool of hidden desires and vengeful acts. Detective Moore's investigation gained significant momentum as more damning details relentlessly emerged. She meticulously scrutinized hours of grainy surveillance footage, searching for any telltale sign, any fleeting shadow that might betray a hidden truth. She delved deep into a labyrinth of phone records, tracing calls and uncovering clandestine communications, mapping out Tom's last known movements and the desolate locations where he had sought refuge. Her determination to uncover the unvarnished truth was relentless, an unyielding force fueled not only by a profound sense of professional duty but also by a deep-seated desire to deliver justice, not just for the brutally murdered Jessica, but, in an unexpected twist, for Tom as well. Interviews with those closest to the intricately woven case, neighbors, colleagues, even distant acquaintances, began to paint a chillingly vivid picture. It was the portrait of a man, Tom, utterly consumed by a virulent cocktail of prejudice and obsessive rage, a darkness that had ultimately devoured him. Yet, woven into this grim tapestry was also the image of a husband, Ben, driven to the brink by an agonizing grief, desperate to avenge the senseless death of his beloved wife. The narrative unfolding before Detective Moore was one of profound human tragedy, revealing the raw, destructive power of unchecked emotions. But as the investigation deepened, even more unsettling questions began to surface. What further layers of deception lay hidden, and what ultimate price would the community of Redwood Glen pay for the secrets it had so carefully kept? The final, devastating truth, she suspected, was still waiting in the shadows. Moore, her gaze unwavering and perceptive, next interviewed Lucas, Ben's brother. Lucas was visibly uncomfortable, his posture stiff, his eyes darting restlessly, yet he remained meticulously careful with his words, choosing each one with a palpable trepidation. Detective Moore, with her finely honed instincts, immediately detected his hesitations, sensing, with an almost visceral certainty, that there were crucial pieces of the puzzle he was deliberately withholding, hidden truths he was unwilling to reveal. As Moore, relentless in her pursuit, continued to dig deeper, peeling back the layers of polite suburban facade, she began to uncover a disturbing history, Tom's deeply entrenched racial animosity, a pervasive prejudice that had festered beneath the surface. This animosity, she realized, had fueled the escalating layers of tension that had so tragically built between him and Jessica, transforming their neighborly interactions into a silent, deadly battleground. She began to strongly suspect that Ben's overwhelming, soul-shattering grief had driven him to extreme, unforgivable lengths, compelling him to step outside the bounds of the law he had once sworn to uphold. Yet, frustratingly, despite her growing conviction, she still lacked any direct, concrete evidence that could definitively link Ben to Tom's fiery demise. Moore felt a growing certainty that the ultimate truth, the final, undeniable proof, was tantalizingly just out of her reach, like a phantom limb. Her mind raced with countless theories, each one a potential narrative of the tragedy, as the immense weight of the entire investigation pressed down heavily upon her, threatening to consume her own sense of justice. Driven by an unwavering commitment, Detective Carla Moore spent countless long nights poring over the intricate details of the case, meticulously piecing together the potential evidence against Ben. She followed every lead, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, with methodical precision, her movements deliberate and unwavering. Despite the cacophony of rumors swirling incessantly around Redwood Glen, a town now fractured by suspicion and fear, she knew, with an unshakable professional certainty, that a conviction demanded far more than mere suspicions or whispered accusations. It required undeniable, tangible proof that would stand up to the unforgiving scrutiny of a court of law. Her focus intensified on the forensic evidence collected from Jessica's murder scene, meticulously examining every fiber, every trace, every minute detail, hoping, almost desperately, for any subtle connection, any unseen link that might bridge the chasm between Ben and Tom's violent final moments. The air in her office, thick with the scent of stale coffee and unanswered questions, mirrored the intricate web of deception and vengeance she was attempting to untangle. What hidden clues still lay buried in the cold case files, and would she be able to construct a narrative compelling enough to bring a just resolution to the devastating events that had irrevocably shattered Redwood Glen? The final chapter of this tragic saga, she knew, lay waiting to be written. Interviews with Lucas, now openly grappling with his complicity, and other reluctant witnesses, collectively painted a vivid, tragic tableau of profound betrayal and violent revenge. Detective Moore, a woman deeply affected by the human toll of her work, felt the immense, oppressive weight of the case pressing down on her, an emotional burden that far transcended her professional duties. She understood, with a somber clarity, the devastating cost that justice, in its most unforgiving form, would exact from all involved, leaving no one unscathed. Her meticulous revisits to both crime scenes, a process that demanded unwavering attention to the minutiae, began to yield crucial, previously overlooked details. Near Jessica's home, where an innocent life had been so brutally extinguished, she discovered a faint, yet distinct, tire track, its unique pattern matching precisely the tires on Ben's vehicle. Then, at the desolate desert canyon where Tom's car had met its fiery end, forensic specialists uncovered a faint, almost imperceptible trace of explosive residue, a chemical signature that undeniably tied Ben to Tom's violent demise. Each painstakingly unearthed clue added significant weight to the intricate puzzle, progressively giving her a clearer, more horrifying picture of how a grief-stricken desire for vengeance had spiraled inexorably into a devastating, double tragedy. Yet, as she relentlessly uncovered these harsh, undeniable truths, Moore found herself grappling with a haunting, ethically complex question that tugged at the very fabric of her professional convictions. Could Ben's actions, however brutal and unequivocally outside the bounds of the law, be perceived, in some primal, visceral way, as a legitimate form of justice? The cold, impartial letter of the law was crystal clear, its boundaries sharply defined. But her conscience, a sensitive instrument attuned to the nuances of human suffering, wavered, caught between duty and empathy. She understood, with a profound sense of sadness, the shattered lives, the unquantifiable pain, that lay behind each piece of evidence, each undeniable fact she had so painstakingly brought to light. The day of Ben's arrest dawned with an air of somber finality, a heavy sense of impending consequence. Detective Moore, her expression a carefully constructed mask of professional neutrality, approached Ben at his home in Redwood Glen. The crisp morning air, usually a harbinger of new beginnings, now felt charged with an undeniable tension as she delivered the arrest warrant, her voice steady but laced with an unspoken gravity. Word of his arrest, carried on the invisible currents of digital communication and hushed conversations, spread like wildfire through the already fractured community of Redwood Glen, immediately creating an even deeper, more entrenched divide among the townspeople. The saga of prejudice, betrayal, and vengeance had reached its agonizing, inevitable crescendo, but the scars it left on the heart of the community would linger, a permanent reminder of the darkness that could lurk beneath the most idyllic surfaces. What future awaited Redwood Glen, now irrevocably marked by the shadows of its past? For a significant portion of the now fractured community, Ben was immediately elevated to the status of a tragic hero, a man who, in their eyes, had courageously sacrificed everything, his reputation, his freedom, perhaps even his soul, to right an unspeakable wrong, to mete out justice where the system had seemed to fail. To others, however, his actions painted a darker, more unsettling picture. He was a man utterly consumed, and ultimately lost, in the suffocating depths of his grief, a soul who had irrevocably crossed an unforgivable line, descending into the abyss of vigilantism. Ben, when confronted by Detective Moore, faced his arrest with a complex mixture of weary resignation and a strange, almost palpable sense of relief. Deep down, he had always understood that his solitary, agonizing journey for vengeance, fueled by the memory of his beloved Jessica, had been destined, from its very inception, to culminate in this exact, inevitable ending. As the cold metal of the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, a torrent of memories of Jessica flooded his mind, each cherished moment a sharp, searing reminder of the vibrant life, the profound love, that had been so cruelly and unjustly stolen from him. Clara Reed, Jessica's mother, observed the scene from a respectful distance, her heart a tangled knot of emotions. Despite the anger she had once harbored, the raw indignation she had felt towards Ben's desperate, vengeful actions, she now felt a profound surge of compassion and sorrow for him. Seeing him, a broken man in cuffs, his shoulders slumped in defeat, broke her heart anew, a fresh wound bleeding into the old. Lucas, his face a mask of anguish, watched helplessly as his brother was led away, his own loyalty to Ben warring fiercely with the stark, crushing reality of the dire consequences of what they had collectively done. Ben was then gently but firmly guided towards the waiting patrol car. As the door closed with a definitive thud behind him, severing him from his former life, he cast one last, lingering glance out at the familiar world he would now leave behind. He knew, with an agonizing certainty, that the arduous, winding path to any semblance of healing, for himself, for the community, for all the shattered lives, would be a long, uncertain, and incredibly difficult one, if it existed at all. The very air in Redwood Glen seemed to hum with the weight of unspoken grief and looming judgment. The courtroom, a crucible of public opinion and legal scrutiny, was soon filled to absolute capacity with a restless throng of curious spectators and an eager, expectant media, each person watching every tense, dramatic moment of Ben's impending trial unfold, eager for the next chapter in this tragic, captivating saga. What truths would emerge in the stark light of the courtroom, and what verdict would ultimately be rendered on a man driven to the edge by love and loss? Both his steadfast defense team and the relentless prosecution meticulously painted Ben in starkly contrasting lights, each side striving to sculpt a compelling narrative that would sway the jury. His impassioned defense lawyer, a seasoned orator with a reputation for unwavering conviction, argued vehemently that Ben was merely a grieving husband, a man pushed far beyond the fragile limits of human endurance, his mind irrevocably broken by the unimaginable trauma and profound injustice of Jessica's brutal murder. They strategically called upon Pastor James Carter, a figure of moral authority and spiritual comfort within the community, to testify, hoping his eloquent words could offer the jury a poignant glimpse into the depths of Ben's unbearable sorrow and his shattered, broken spirit. Pastor James, his voice resonating with an empathetic gravitas, spoke eloquently of the corrosive nature of loss and the redemptive power of forgiveness, portraying Ben not as a malevolent criminal, but as a man utterly consumed by an all-encompassing grief rather than malicious intent. His heartfelt testimony left the usually bustling courtroom hushed, a profound silence settling over the spectators as many visibly felt the immense, oppressive weight of Ben's suffering. The prosecutor, however, a figure of unwavering resolve and sharp legal acumen, presented the incriminating evidence with a methodical, almost clinical precision. She argued, with compelling force, that Ben's actions, far from being the impulsive acts of a broken man, were undeniably premeditated and executed with a chilling, calculated resolve. She called upon a succession of witnesses who spoke of Ben's methodical planning, the meticulous tracking of Tom's movements, and the deliberate preparation for their final confrontation. Each piece of evidence, each damning detail, meticulously laid bare before the jury, revealed not a mind clouded by an overwhelming grief, but rather one capable of cold, calculating thought and ruthless execution. In the packed courtroom, friends and family of both Ben and Jessica sat on the literal edge of their seats, their faces a mixture of hope and dread. Some, clinging to their affection for Ben, saw him unequivocally as a tragic victim of circumstance, forced into an impossible choice. Others, however, wrestled visibly with the profound moral implications of the choices he had made, unable to reconcile the loving husband they knew with the vengeful killer he had become. The air hung thick with anticipation, the fate of a man and the very definition of justice hanging precariously in the balance. What verdict would the jury deliver, and how would it ultimately define the tragic legacy of Redwood Glen? The tension within the courtroom was palpable, thick and suffocating, as the jury, their faces etched with the profound gravity of their responsibility, listened intently. Each impassioned testimony, each piece of evidence, each carefully constructed argument, tugged relentlessly at their individual perceptions of guilt and innocence, creating an intricate, moral labyrinth. With every new revelation, the once clear line between justice and revenge became increasingly blurred, indistinct, leaving the town's collective sense of right and wrong profoundly fractured and uncertain. As the emotionally charged trial inexorably neared its conclusion, the very conscience of Redwood Glen was put to an agonizing test, forcing its residents to confront uncomfortable truths about their own values. In hushed, often anguished tones, people debated whether Ben's desperate, violent actions could, under any circumstance, be morally justified, or if he had instead allowed his overwhelming grief to tragically blind him, obliterating the crucial distinction between righteous justice and consuming vengeance. Pastor James, a beacon of spiritual guidance, paid a solemn visit to Ben in the stark, unforgiving confines of his jail cell. With gentle yet firm conviction, he urged Ben to embark on the arduous journey of forgiving himself, to consciously acknowledge the profound darkness he had allowed to infiltrate his life, and to earnestly seek a path towards redemption. Ben, his face a landscape of etched sorrow, visibly marked by countless sleepless nights and an almost unbearable sense of regret, listened quietly, his gaze distant. The pastor's powerful words, infused with empathy and wisdom, hung heavily in the air between them, and Ben visibly struggled to accept the agonizing truth, that his own desperate, misguided path to peace had, ironically, led only to such profound violence and an even deeper, more complex sorrow. Detective Moore, observing the unfolding human drama from a professional distance, yet deeply affected by its complexities, was herself left to grapple with her own burgeoning doubts about the legal system's ultimate capacity to deliver true, holistic justice in a case so profoundly steeped in human emotion and tragic circumstances. The verdict, once delivered, would not merely determine Ben's fate, but would also irrevocably cast a long, enduring shadow over the moral landscape of Redwood Glen, defining its understanding of justice and its capacity for healing. Detective Moore, a woman who had meticulously dedicated her entire professional career to the unwavering pursuit and upholding of the law, found herself profoundly troubled by Ben's complex, heartbreaking story. His was a tragedy, she realized with a chilling clarity, fueled by the very prejudices and systemic injustices that the elaborate legal system was ostensibly designed to combat and eradicate. She found herself questioning the rigid definitions of justice, wondering if there existed a different, perhaps more nuanced, kind of justice, one that could somehow simultaneously honor Jessica's tragically cut-short memory and, at the same time, acknowledge the deep, indelible scars that Ben now carried, both physically and psychologically. As she sat alone in the quiet solitude of her office late that night, the only sound the soft hum of her computer, she realized with a growing, unsettling clarity that the true complexity of justice was far more profound, far more intricate, than any single verdict, no matter how carefully considered, could ever encapsulate. When the jury, their faces grim and unreadable, finally returned to the courtroom, an immediate, deafening silence descended upon the packed room. All eyes, a collective gaze of anticipation and apprehension, were fixed solely on Ben, whose posture was rigid, his face a mask of weary resignation. The foreperson's voice, clear and resonant, rang out, cutting through the oppressive stillness as they delivered the verdict, guilty of manslaughter. For many within the community and observing media, the verdict felt like a difficult, yet necessary, compromise, a poignant recognition of Ben's overwhelming emotional turmoil and the profound trauma he had endured, while still unequivocally holding him accountable for the deadly, irreversible choices he had made. The judge, his voice somber and deliberate, addressed Ben directly. He acknowledged the depth and validity of Ben's grief, a sorrow no human could easily bear, but unequivocally condemned his choice to bypass the established legal system and take the law into his own, vengeful hands. A reduced sentence was ultimately granted, offering him a measure of leniency, a small concession to the emotional circumstances that had driven him. Yet, this reduced sentence, this gesture of compassion from the court, did remarkably little to ease the crushing weight of guilt that Ben, in the silent chambers of his own heart, continued to carry, a burden that would undoubtedly accompany him long after the courtroom doors had closed. The scales of justice, in this case, had weighed not just facts, but also the immeasurable depths of human emotion, leaving a lasting, complex legacy in Redwood Glen. Ben's reaction to the verdict was profoundly somber, a silent acceptance of his fate. His gaze remained fixed on the scuffed courtroom floor, his shoulders slumped with the crushing weight of his choices. He had, in the long, desolate nights leading up to this moment, meticulously prepared himself for this outcome, understanding with a chilling clarity that his all-consuming need for revenge had ultimately cost him nearly everything he held dear. As he was slowly escorted out of the courtroom, a figure of weary resignation, Clara, Jessica's mother, made a spontaneous, gentle gesture of forgiveness, extending her hand towards him. The unexpected touch, a silent acknowledgement of shared sorrow and perhaps a nascent understanding, caught him by surprise. Her unspoken compassion, her willingness to offer even a sliver of comfort amidst his profound despair, provided him with a faint, flickering spark of hope, a small, yet significant, acknowledgement that though his path had been tragically dark and stained with violence, he was not entirely alone in his suffering. As he walked past the solemn faces of his friends and family, their eyes met his, revealing a complex mix of sorrow, understanding, and lingering questions. Ben, in that moment, understood with a piercing clarity that his true punishment extended far beyond the confines of prison bars. It would forever linger in the vast, aching emptiness that Jessica had left behind, and in the irrevocably altered lives of every person affected by his desperate, destructive pursuit of vengeance. Years later, a man transformed by suffering and profound reflection, Ben returned to Redwood Glen, the quiet, suburban town he had once called home, a place now laden with ghosts and echoes of his past. The immense weight of his choices, the indelible scars etched upon his soul, had visibly aged him, deepening the lines around his eyes and adding a quiet gravitas to his demeanor. Yet, amidst the weariness, he carried a deep, quiet resolve, a new, healthier purpose to honor Jessica's cherished memory in a profoundly different way, not through violence, but through redemption. His first pilgrimage was to her grave, a serene plot beneath the rustling leaves of an old oak tree. With hands that no longer trembled, he carefully placed a vibrant bouquet of fragrant lilies by her elegant headstone, their white petals a poignant symbol of purity and renewed hope, a silent promise whispered on the gentle breeze. The air, once thick with tension and the stench of tragedy, now carried the faint, sweet scent of blooming flowers, a testament to the enduring power of memory and the possibility, however distant, of healing. What new path would Ben forge in the shadow of his past, and could a broken community ever truly mend its fractured soul? As the gentle breeze, a soft sigh of the lingering afternoon, stirred around him, rustling the leaves of the ancient oak above, Ben murmured, his voice thick with a profound, raw emotion, "I'm sorry, Jessica." The words were a quiet confession, a deep acknowledgement of his past transgressions and the devastating path he had chosen. "I did what I thought was right," he continued, his voice barely a whisper, "but I know now it was wrong. I wish you were here." His gaze remained fixed on her name etched into the cold stone, a silent plea echoing across the years. Standing steadfastly by his side, Clara and Lucas offered their silent, unwavering support, their presence a comforting anchor in his turbulent emotional sea. There was no need for words between them, they understood, with an unspoken clarity, the long, arduous journey that had inexorably led them all to this poignant moment of reflection and reconciliation. Together, beneath the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy, they reflected on Jessica's vibrant life, her infectious laughter, the genuine warmth she had so freely extended, and the indelible mark she had left on each of their hearts. Ben's heart ached, a complex tapestry woven with threads of sorrow for what was lost and a burgeoning, unexpected sense of peace for the path he had finally chosen. He knew, with a newfound certainty, that his way forward meant living a life that truly honored Jessica's memory, not through the destructive fires of retribution, but through acts of quiet redemption and genuine healing. As they slowly, deliberately, walked away from the grave, leaving Jessica to her eternal rest, Ben felt the first true, unburdened sense of closure he had known in years, a fragile, yet profound, peace settling over his weary soul. Redwood Glen, though irrevocably scarred by the profound tragedy that had unfolded within its quiet streets, now seemed, in this moment of quiet grace, ready to embark on its own long, slow journey towards healing. The insidious whispers that had once permeated its avenues had finally faded into oblivion, replaced by the mundane sounds of everyday life. New families, unaware of the deep-seated sorrow that had once shadowed the neighborhood, had moved into homes where dark memories once lingered, bringing with them fresh hope and new beginnings. With each deliberate step away from the grave, towards the promise of a different future, Ben felt the oppressive darkness, a heavy shroud that had clung to him for so long, begin to slowly, gently, lift, making way for the first faint rays of a hard-won dawn. He knew, with an unshakable certainty that settled deep within his bones, that he could never, irrevocably, undo the past, the profound, soul-shattering loss, the violence, the agonizing choices that had shaped his darkest years. Those indelible scars would forever remain, a permanent testament to the fires he had walked through. But he could, with every fiber of his being, choose a different future, a future meticulously constructed, brick by painstaking brick, to be entirely free of the corrosive, destructive grip of hatred. He envisioned a life where the transformative power of love, in its purest, most resilient form, would finally replace the all-consuming, destructive thirst for vengeance that had once defined him. He yearned for a future where a fragile, hard-won peace, delicate yet profound, would at last settle around him, a gentle balm for his weary soul. The journey would be long, arduous, and fraught with challenges, but the path, illuminated by the memory of Jessica and the hope of redemption, was now clear. He walked forward, not just for himself, but for the quiet possibility of a tranquil existence, a life rebuilt from the ashes, where the echoes of the past would finally, gently, recede into the distance.